Great. We're going to go through a second round here. I want to talk about the process and prioritization of air assets. So we have two geographic JTFs, and then we have your Air Force is Air and Marine. Can you guys talk me through the process of how you prioritize requirements for specifically ISR air assets, and who makes the decision on where those air assets go and how nimble that is? And then, Ms. Gambler, I think you talked a little bit about this related to the Predator B. I want your perspective after I hear. So, like, obviously you may have competing requirements, so who decides where the air assets are going, and how quickly does that turn, and is it modified on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? Chief, either you guys want to go first, Chief?
So I'll go back to having recently come from the Tucson sector. We had an air tasking operations group, so it was basically all of the providers of air support within the corridor, primarily the Office of Air and Marine. There was some DOD support. We did get some state and local support, and even Civil Air Patrol provided support to us. So they're meeting on a biweekly basis, sitting down, looking at getting an intel brief to start with. Okay, here's what we're seeing. Here's where we see the activity occurring, the threats, things of that nature. This is where we think we're going to need air support, and then plugging in based on that. So the priorities are set by the commanders in the field. Primarily, the agents in charge at the stations are saying, these are my priorities. Those would come up and get vetted at the sector level, and then those would be the priorities for that group for that time period.
But just to clarify, is it stays static within the corridor? I mean, there's not easy movement of air assets across corridors or between task forces the way, if we were being really fluid, we would prioritize more fluidly across corridors and task forces, as opposed to like everybody having their own little air force within a corridor or a sector. That makes sense.
So I think I understand what you're saying. That's not how we're currently operating.
Okay, that's what I understand. I just wanted to.
Chairwoman, I would say when you move to the maritime domain,
Yep.
and I'll walk back to an example of Chief Beast and I in the past, I would say it's actually quite well integrated. So let's look at Puerto Rico. So we have Coast Guard helicopters based out of Puerto Rico. Sometimes we'll forward deploy a more capable 60 helicopters. Sometimes we'll deploy a CASA 235 Maritime Patrol fixed-wing aircraft. We work with CBP down there. They fly Dash 8s. We do joint air tasking, so there is coordination. So if we have a target that, let's say the Coast Guard longer range capability, the CASA picks up a couple hundred miles south of Hispaniola moving in, we can do a handoff to a CBP aircraft. We can hand that aircraft off to a Coast Guard helicopter, track that to the beach. We can bring in Coast Guard maritime forces. We can bring in a CBP Mike boat, it's a Midnight Express or a safe boat. We can bring in Fura, which is a local law enforcement. We've perfected that. When Chief and I worked in California, we would have a panga coming up for 18-hour transits, 20-hour transits. The Congressman Rutherford talked about that. We could keep air on top of that. It typically started hundreds of miles away with a Coast Guard C-130 aircraft. We would sometimes use the CBP MEAs, the small twin fixed-wing aircraft, do a handoff there, ultimately to a 60 to another C-130 until we had an end game. So I think we've actually worked in the scheduling of that, and we're perfecting that at the maritime. And when you get to land-centric, if Chief's team comes forward with a request to the Coast Guard, maybe out of San Diego in that corridor, we will respond to those on a case-by-case basis. We don't fly a lot over the land, but we certainly will support those requests when they come in.
Great, but generally speaking, there's not a lot of fluidity between JTF East, JTF West air support assets. You're generally talking about what is within your ability to task in JTF East, but there.
Well, if we're talking in the wet domain, I would say there absolutely is a coordination through our, at the very pointy end at our sectors in the Gulf of Mexico, at the regional coordinating mechanisms, they work across that seam without border. I mean, if there's a need, we talk to CBP Air Marine, they talk to Coast Guard, we can interchange, we can be, what we try to do is minimize redundancy. So I say in Chief's world, predominantly in the land-centric border, we're not flying a lot of Coast Guard air there, so I'd say you're not seeing that synergy because there's not that sort of demand signal. We're working in different spaces most of the time than west.
Yeah, but specifically air and marine assets, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I would tell you, ma'am, I think there's a great story there.
Okay.
I think we schedule jointly together, we have, rooted out any redundancies, and we can do hot handoffs where, these cases, particularly in the water when they're fast-moving targets operating at night, shutting down the daytime, if you're not on top of them, they're very difficult to go back and detect again. So it's all about that efficiency, that crisp handoff, and I think we got that wired pretty well.
Ms. Gambler, your perspective on?
Yep, related specifically to predator bees, Chairwoman, we found that there were some differences across the different air and marine operation centers for predator bees. So some of those operation centers did have procedures for coordinating requests for predator bee support, and then some didn't. And so our recommendation was to better improve those coordination procedures as they relate across all of the different air and marine operation centers for the predator bees.
So they're specifically asking request for a platform as opposed to a capability in some of these centers?
So we looked at what are called the four operation centers from which Air and Marine flies the predator bees, and so some of those air operation centers have procedures for coordinating the requests that they receive for air support and that kind of thing, and some didn't. So hopefully that clarifies. And so our recommendation was related to strengthening those coordination procedures and making sure they exist across the different operation centers from which predator bees fly.
Yeah, my only point is, again, I'm coming from my military experience, you don't ask for an asset, you ask for a capability, and there are other manned surveillance capabilities out there. So if you need intelligence, you don't say this is the platform I want. And so an intelligence process needs to look at what the requirements are, what the prioritization is, and then what platforms can meet that requirement, not I need my predator today is all I'm getting at. So, okay, I'm over my time, so